There are 4 things about early Pennsylvania history that if you know them, it will help you so much in your research, you'll be astounded. Hi everyone, I'm Denise Allen. I'm a researcher here in Pennsylvania. I do a lot of genealogy work, and today it is Pennsylvania's birthday this week. We are 342 years old this year. That's a lot of history in the United States. I know it's not a lot in a lot of other parts of the world, but we're proud of our 342 years, every single one of them. And I'm going to explain to you in this episode exactly some things that happened early in the formation of Pennsylvania that really affected our culture and society long-standing. And if you had early Pennsylvania ancestors, you're going to want to know these because it's going to completely warp your brain. You might not know some of these things. I didn't know them until a few years ago, and they really shocked me, and I'm a lifelong Pennsylvania resident. So the 4 things are: 1, about Pennsylvania and the Revolutionary War, so there's a lot of misunderstandings there. I'm going to cover a few of them. 2, about the land situation for early Pennsylvanians. 3, about the number of religions that we had here in the state before 1800. I think you're going to be really surprised by how many there were. I bet you can't name all of them. And number 4 is about the very odd beginning of Pennsylvania, which involves the Book of Revelation. So you're going to want to stick around for number 4 because it's a biggie. Now, the first thing a lot of people don't know about Pennsylvania history is particularly around the Revolution. The Revolution, as we know, 1776 is always the date associated with that, but the Revolutionary War actually occurred from 1775 to 1783. A lot of the bloody battles were fought in the Pennsylvania countryside, in and around Philadelphia, and so that affected a lot of people in terms of not wanting to be involved in that war. And I know that sounds strange because we think of Philadelphia as being the home of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution later in 1789. But really, the people that lived in and around Philadelphia were having war at their doorstep, and they just tried to stay out of it. They tried to stay neutral. They tried to not pick a side, because if you pick the losing side, the repercussions from that were going to be harsh on you and your family. And this war went on for a very long time. The first amount of conflict and struggle around the relationship between America and Britain really began in 1765. And as I mentioned, the Constitution was not signed until 1789. That's 24 years of conflict. That's a generation. So people were tired. They just wanted to live their life. The way I can best help you understand this is the modern book, The Disaffected. This was put out in 2019 by Sullivan. I hope to have him on the podcast so he can talk about it. But I included a link to a presentation he did with the Athenaeum in Philadelphia just a few months ago about his book and his research. So I think it gives an important perspective that a lot of the people that lived in and around Philadelphia, again, not the majority, but certainly a significant portion, like 30 or 40%, had this attitude of just not participating in this conflict or war and not really picking a side. So a lot of people think, oh, I have Pennsylvania ancestors, they must have fought in the Revolution. No. The other book that's really helpful if you don't have ancestors in and around Philadelphia, but in one of the other counties, this was a book I just discovered. It was put out in 1989, put out by Penn State Press, called Beyond Philadelphia: The American Revolution in the Hinterlands. And this describes the conflict in every county among the residents about what they were going to do in terms of the Revolutionary War. Were they going to support the new American effort to free itself from Britain? Were they supporting Britain and just wanted to stay loyal to the crown? So, or again, did they want to stay out of it and just remain neutral and just see how things shook out? You can just read the county that your ancestors lived in. Each chapter is a county, and it does give a great perspective in terms of the various ethnicities that were here and religions and the way that they handled the Revolutionary War. I put a link to both of those books, titles, and the authors in the show notes so you can look those up. One is in print, one is out of print right now, so happy hunting for both of them. Now, the second thing that a lot of people don't appreciate about this early Pennsylvania history is how landless people were. And what do I mean by landless? I mean people that just did not have a lot of wealth or stature within the community. A lot of the research focus for a lot of people in terms of Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania German ancestors. The German speaking people, when they came to Pennsylvania, a lot of them tended to be very middle class type people where they had trades, they set up shops, and they kept great records, both through their private affairs and having land and wealth to pass on to their descendants, but also through their churches. Now, that was one portion of the population of Pennsylvania at the time, 30 to 40%. The remaining population of Pennsylvania was English Quakers who also kept great records. And then, of course, the Scots-Irish was our other big ethnic group that we had in Pennsylvania early on. Those were the main huge ethnic groups. We also had a small African American population, both free and enslaved, and their records are equally as hard to find as these other landless folks. It is just really, really hard. So if you have ancestors that did not have enough wealth to pass on to their children or their spouse, they're just next to impossible to track, because those probate records and those land deeds are the way that we track people in early Pennsylvania. So it's important to recognize that a lot of the early Scots-Irish people in particular that came here as indentured labor, or perhaps they were prisoners cast off from the British Isles and left here to basically try to form a life. So if you find yourself with particularly that Scotch-Irish background or an African-American background in early Pennsylvania, you're going to need to really build out that fan club and figure out who your people are associating with in order to do any headway in terms of your research. So the landless were a big part of Pennsylvania history. Up to half the people here did not own land or have enough wealth to pass on to their family. And so the best way that you're going to be able to research them, again, is that fan club. And then those really obscure records that we have in Pennsylvania, such as tax records or court records at our county courthouses. And then if you can find church records, which again are very hard to find in rural areas in the early part of Pennsylvania history. But if you can find those, that is going to be your best path forward with that. Now, the third surprising thing about early Pennsylvania is the number of religions that we had. We had 21 distinct religions in Pennsylvania, and the interesting part about this is many times the people within these religions married within their faith and didn't go outside of it. So if you can target in on your research what religion your ancestors were, it can really help you get things settled. And here's the list of the 21 religions. Some of them you may know and some of them you may not. Ready? I'm going to read them out. We had the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Amish, the Baptists, the Brethrens, the Congregational and Evangelical Congregational faiths, the Dutch Reformed, the Episcopalians, also known as the Anglicans or the Church of England, the German Reformed, the Jewish faith, Lutherans, Methodists, Mennonites, Moravians, Pietists, Presbyterians and Associate Reformed Presbyterians, Roman Catholics, Schwenkenfelders, Seventh-day Baptists, Swedenborgians, also known today as the New Church, Unitarians, Universalists, and Quakers, also known as the Religious Society of Friends. So, if you are searching in church records and religious records, You'll want to check all 21. Now, the last thing that is shocking about early Pennsylvania history is how it exactly started and what William Penn's faith was. Now, we know that he was a Quaker, and we know he converted to Quakerism in about 1660. He got the charter for Pennsylvania in 1681 and came here in 1682. And he came here and named it Pennsylvania. We know the Sylvania, it has to do with woods. But it also had to do with the wilderness. And he felt, again, as a part of his Quaker faith and his intense reading of the book of Revelation and the book of John and the Old Testament, was that it was the end times. At the time that he came here in 1682, the book of Revelation was being played out right then. And Pennsylvania, being the wilderness, was specifically a part of Chapter 12, the women in the wilderness, and he felt that he and his people would be safe here when the end times came. Now, we are all here today, so we know the end times did not in fact happen in 1682 or 1690 or any time after that, but William Penn really believed it, as did many of the people that came with him. If you are familiar with the book of Revelation, you also know that Philadelphia was named what it was, given William Penn's beliefs. So if that sounds a little unusual to you, it sure did to me when I heard it too. I had no idea, even though I was born here in PA, how kind of fatalistic the founder was of the colony, the province of Pennsylvania. And it really makes me wonder if maybe why some of the records I have a hard time finding in the early part of Pennsylvania has to do with the fact of, why keep records if you think that, there won't be a world to have records for soon. So that is 4 things about Pennsylvania that you might not know in terms of early Pennsylvania research, and it might kind of affect how you think of your ancestors who were here at that time, and maybe give you some ideas or clues as to some additional avenues of search, particularly in terms of the religions that were here at the time in Pennsylvania. So my name is Denise Allen, and again, if you would like to learn more, I have a newsletter called PA Ancestors Discovery. The link is in the show notes, and I hope you subscribe and get more tips and hints on your Pennsylvania ancestors.